For most of my life, I really didn't like mushrooms. Not the organisms themselves, but eating mushrooms. I didn't like the taste of them, or the smell of them, or even the texture. The thing is that I actually really want to like mushrooms because I love nature and I love eating wild, fresh food. So we decided to try growing our own mushrooms to see if I like them any more than the ones you can buy from the supermarket. So in this video, I want to show you how we grew our first ever mushrooms. We decided to grow oyster mushrooms for our first attempt. They're supposed to be good for beginners and don't taste too mushroomy. Perfect for me. Oyster mushrooms can be grown on straw, so I started by cutting up some barley straw that we had left over from mulching around the strawberries. I quickly found that chopping dry straw with scissors is quite difficult, so I decided to soak it in water for a little while and try again. This helped a little bit, but in the future I think I'll just buy straw that's already finely chopped. It's important that the straw is pasteurised before growing mushrooms in it, otherwise other microbes might start to colonise the substrate before the mushrooms can take hold. To pasteurise the straw, I boiled it in a pan of water for a few minutes. I then took it off the heat and left it to cool with the lid on. While the straw was cooling, I started preparing the growing container. This is just a plastic bucket with a lid. I drilled holes about every 15 centimetres around the container. These holes will allow oxygen-rich air to reach the fungal mycelium, which will help to initiate fruiting. The mushrooms will then fruit through these small holes. I also drilled a few holes in the bottom of the bucket to allow excess water to drain away. I cleaned the inside and outside of the bucket with warm, soapy water to remove any dirt, and then with an antibacterial wipe to try and kill as many microbes as possible before inoculating the straw with fungi. Once the straw had cooled to room temperature, it was time to inoculate it. This is the fungi grain spawn that I used. I left it in our fridge for quite a long time, so it was pretty much one solid block that I had to break apart to use, but it seemed to work just fine. I filled the bucket in alternating layers of straw and fungi, straw at the bottom and straw at the top. Each straw layer is firmed down to ensure good contact with the grain spawn and to cram in as much fungal food as possible. The lid goes on and paper tape is used to cover each of the holes. This will stop pests and competing organisms from entering the bucket and reduce moisture loss. While the mycelium is busy filling the container, not very much oxygen is required, so taping seems to work quite well. I put the bucket in our airing cupboard to incubate because it stays at around 20 to 21 degrees Celsius, which seems to be a good temperature for oyster mushrooms. After about 3 weeks, the mycelium had filled the bucket, so I took it out of the airing cupboard, removed the paper tape to allow excess CO2 to leave the bucket and fresh oxygenated air to enter the bucket, and placed the bucket in our bathroom, which is a bit cooler and has a window to allow light in. I sprayed water around it frequently throughout the day to keep it humid, and a week or two later, we had our first bunch of oyster mushrooms. We decided to make a mushroom risotto. Amy fried the oyster mushrooms with garlic and thyme from the garden. The mushrooms were then placed on top of the risotto, which contained onion, courgette and sweet chestnuts. The risotto tasted absolutely amazing and I really loved the mushrooms in it. Growing the mushrooms at home definitely changed my perspective and ultimately how much I enjoyed eating them. They also had a much more mild flavour than the chestnut mushrooms that I've had from the supermarket in the past, which is really good for me. I'm really excited to learn more about mushroom growing, and then we can refine our technique for growing mushrooms at home. Around the same time that we were growing mushrooms at home, I found out about a wild mushroom called chicken of the woods, which was supposed to be quite common here in the UK. The chicken of the woods is supposed to be best harvested between May and June. If you harvest it too late, it goes a bit woody. We went out foraging for it and didn't have luck for the first couple of times, but We did manage to find one at the beginning of June. We sliced it up into strips and marinated it in teriyaki sauce and olive oil. I got this idea from a YouTube video by the mycologist Paul Stamets. We fried our fungi and had it with some quinoa, bulgur wheat and broccoli. This is the first time either of us had ever eaten fungi that we'd foraged, and it tasted absolutely amazing. So I think now I have to say that I do like mushrooms, but I'm very picky at the moment. I only really eat homegrown oyster mushrooms and foraged chicken of the woods.